Today we're taking another look at the Detroit Red Wings and what they could potentially do for the 2020 NHL Draft. We've already talked about the Red Wings a little bit before because they have officially clinched last place in the NHL, meaning that in the upcoming draft, they will draft no later than 4th overall. They will get either 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, depending on who wins the lotteries and depending on how the order goes. But one thing is for certain, Detroit has the highest odds at number 1 on an individual pick scale, and they are most likely going to draft in the top 3. Now, I do say they have the highest odds at number 1 on an individual pick scale because the Ottawa Senators actually have 2 picks that have very good chances at winning number 1, and if you combine those together, you get Ottawa at the highest combined odds. But just for the sake of this argument, let's talk about the Detroit Red Wings and the possibilities that await them if they do draft number 1. Now, the first overall projected pick is none other than Alexis Lafrenière. We've already made a few videos over the years talking about Lafrenière and how good he is supposed to be, how good he can be, and just the impact that he can have in the NHL as soon as next season. But in this video, we're talking about the possibility of Detroit possibly having somebody else at their number 1 spot. Now, again, this is no facts, this is no rumors, this is none of that. This is pure hypothetical discussion brought upon ideas that have been spoken by highly prominent figures in the hockey world. To know what we're talking about here, we gotta go to Craig Button's Twitter account. Craig Button is a scout for TSN. He's the guy that does all of the mock drafts, and he posts all the draft lists and all the prospect talk that goes on TSN. He had a little thing a few days ago where on Twitter, he was like, hey, we've got a lot of time. Ask me some questions here on the net, and I will reply to them in a tweet. So, on ensued a very long thread of Craig Button questions and Craig Button answers, him talking about the draft, people sharing their opinions. He actually replied to a lot of the replies themselves, acknowledging what people have been saying in response to what he said, getting that discussion flowing, and overall just having a good time. There was even a funny, really, really funny question over here where somebody asks if Craig Button knows about Lish Mishak, who obviously looks to have the same last name as Jan Mishak, but Craig Button responded to it saying that he doesn't know who Lish Mishak is, and the reason I'm saying it like that is because it's not a real guy. If you say it with an English accent, you know what I'm talking about. But there was an interesting little thing over here where Craig Button was talking about the idea of Tim Stützle, the German Adler Mannheim forward, and how high he can go in the draft. A discussion was brought onto the Ottawa Senators and what they would do if they would get the 3rd and 4th overall picks. Said Kuda on Twitter says, hey, I wouldn't be upset with this at all. Stützle and Rossi would be a dream if Lafrenière and Byfield are both off the board. Then Button does say this, I wrote this in an earlier reply. There's no need to be upset if you're a Sens fan. It's such a great point. Let's say the Sens do draft 4 and 5. Let's go back a couple of drafts and ask how the losers in that lottery felt about their picks at 4 and 5. Makar, Colorado, and Pettersson in Vancouver. Wells4467 then replies, I have a feeling Yzerman is taking Stützle if they don't hit number 1 in the lottery. So, if Detroit is not number 1, Wells4467 says that Yzerman will take Stützle, to which Craig Button replies, Stützle is a terrific player. Steve is not reluctant to select a player he feels is the best for his team. It wouldn't surprise me if Steve Yzerman took Stützle 1st overall. Okay, that's Craig Button's opinion over there. It wouldn't surprise him. But what about you? Would it surprise you if Steve Yzerman took Stützle 1st overall? Personally, it'd surprise me. I didn't really see Tim Stützle being a guy to crack that number 1 spot, but now that that idea has been planted in my head, I'm sitting here taking a look at it and trying to analyze what I would feel if that would happen, and why somebody would want to do that. To entertain this discussion a little bit more, let's go over the projected top 3 picks in this year's draft. Lafrenière, Byfield, and in this case, for the sake of argument, let's just say number 3 is Stützle. The potential of all 3 of these guys is completely up and away elite, borderline franchise potential for all of them. However, the likelihood that each of these players fulfills their potential is lower for some and higher for others. Byfield is a guy who, to me, has legit number 1 potential, franchise potential in the NHL, but he's so raw that a lot of things would need to go right to fulfill that. Lafrenière, to me, is a little bit more safer. I think that Byfield has somewhat of a higher ceiling in terms of being a valuable player and an asset to an NHL team, but the likelihood that Lafrenière reaches his ceiling is more than the likelihood of Byfield reaching his potential, if that makes sense. That's how I see it personally. Stützle is a guy who, the likelihood of him reaching his ceiling is higher than a guy like Byfield, in my opinion, but to me, if you took a look at all these guys in their number 1 max ceiling primes, I would say that Byfield has more value to a team. I would say that you would build a team around Byfield more than you would build around a Stützle. Sure, a Stützle has those Mitch Marner, Braden point-like qualities when it comes to playmaking, offensive awareness, skills, footwork, and fancy control of the puck, but to me, it's Lafrenière and Byfield. So if somebody were to take a chance on a Stützle first overall, and if that was a Steve Yzerman, I would be surprised, of course, but at the same time, I wouldn't be like, yo, they got a bad player. It's not like a team choosing Nail Yakupov over a Morgan Rielly first overall. It's not like that at all. In fact, if I were to take a bet, I would say that Tim Stützle probably does have a quicker impact in the NHL at a grander level than a Byfield does. But that's just me. We haven't even touched on the idea of Steve Yzerman taking guys that he feels are right in positions where people wouldn't expect them to go. They literally did that with another German player playing for Adler Mannheim last year at 6th overall in Moritz Seider. So there are already obvious ties to Yzerman taking the guy that nobody would expect to go, and the fact that these 2 players in question are both German playing for the same team definitely ups the likelihood that Yzerman would be interested, at least amongst the fans' point of view. I'm not gonna say that them being German makes Yzerman like them more, it's just a coincidence. But to me, Stützle has been such a big riser, and the fact that he has been legitimately the best German prospect since a Leon Draisaitl in 2014 gives a very good case to make if you're taking a look at it at face value and saying, yeah, you know, could this guy go first overall? We made a video about this a year ago, the idea that Tim Stützle was Germany's best forward since Draisaitl, and that he could potentially surpass him in regards to German forward prosperity. So when you take a look at it like that, you take a look at the potential that he has behind his name, would you take a player of a Leon Draisaitl caliber first overall? And I think in any other draft you would say yeah. Now, I'm not going to say that they play the same way. That's definitely not the case here. Draisaitl's a big guy who can power his way through opponents. Stützle is more shifty, a little bit more finesse-like with the puck. So they're not playing the same way. But the tier of greatness that these 2 have can be considered equal in the grand scheme of things. So, to me, when you have a prospect who is so good that he is overtaking everything, he is a guy playing in the pro-German league as a legitimate scoring threat in the top 6 at 17 years of age, it's a very good sign. And we saw the same thing with Seider last year. So, if Yzerman does do that, they get the first overall pick and they select Tim Stützle, then the hockey world is going to both explode with surprise and excitement at the same time. I know Red Wings fans, some of them last year were kind of turned off by the Seider pick immediately, but after a year, it seems like everybody loves that pick now. So I can't imagine the same thing not happening with a Stützle should he go first overall. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.